What is going on? Today, we're going to test to see which pot does the most damage. That is unupgraded, of course. I think the strongest pot will probably surprise you. But, let's get to it. You know, there was a patch recently, 1.03.2, that kind of limits how many fire pots you can buy. I'm not a particular fan of it, but keep in mind that there are also a lot of other pots you can use that are also highly effective. And I'll show you those today. Alright. So right here, you have the option of about, well, 14 pots. Yeah. First, we're going to test fire, which is the most common and the most accessible. You can buy, used to be able to buy infinite from merchants, but not anymore. It's 50 total now. Alright. So these are the first pots we are going to test, you know, with no upgrades. Aside from aside from leveling them up to level 3, that's the only thing we're going to test. But we're not going to put on the throwing pot talisman that does an extra 20%, or golden vow, or flame grant me strength that boosts the damage up. We're not going to try that. At least not now. So we'll do fire pots first. Alright. We're at level 1. 138. Okay. Level 2. 234. Alright, we're at level 3 now. $354. So each grade you go up by with a fire pot, you're doing about 100 extra damage. That is, of course, if the fire is underneath the enemy, you know, the enemy can run away from the fire underneath their legs and not take full damage. So that's what you're getting for a fire pot. You know, just say that this is the start of the run, and this is what you have. You know, of course there's improved pot relics and stuff like that, but again, let's just assume you don't all have that stuff at first. Okay, so that's fire pots. Alright, we gotta reset it. Yeah, it's kind of annoying. You can't reset your level of pots unless you switch characters, it seems. Okay. Next up, we got magic pots. I think putting the other pots in the other slots was a waste of time, but whatever. So here we go. Level 1. 193. So at level 1, it's already out damaging a fire pot. I think it was 136. Something around there. Let's see what it is at level 2. 235. Okay, so at level 2, it's about the same damage as a fire pot at level 2. Alright, level 3. Okay. So I think 235 plus 96 is like 324, about that. So I think a fire pot outdamages it a little bit at level 3. Nonetheless, magic pots are still pretty powerful, though. You know, they're not far off. You know, if you're facing an enemy that has a lot of fire resistance, a magic pot might be a decent substitute. You can find a decent amount of magic pots in castles with magic. Where else can you find them? Drawing a blank. Well, I mean, I'll go over that maybe in another video. There's also relics where you can start with 4. You can start with 4 pots per relic. So if you have 3 relics, you essentially can start with 12 magic pots total at the start. You know, you don't have to buy it. You start with it right at the start. You can do that with lightning pots and also holy pots and fire pots. You know, if you can have relics that basically give you 12 pots to start with. You know, I'll go over that in more detail at a later time. Anyways, next pot. Lightning pots. Alright. Yeah, I keep messing the process up, but whatever. Alright. Alright, lightning pots. Level 1. 156. So it's more than a fire pot, but less than a magic pot. Alright, level 2. 241. So at level 2, magic, fire, and lightning are all about the same. They're pretty close to each other. And then we test level 3. 362. I think that out damages fire and magic by like about 20 or 30 damage. And in the normal game mode, I'd say that the most common pot you could pick up, aside from fire pots, obviously, is lightning pots. You can find quite a bit of them at a lightning camp or forts. They're pretty common. You can find them in the center castle sometimes. It's still a bit of a pain in the ass to farm for them, but they are easier to access, and they're not always drastically out of the way when you're doing an expedition. So, you know, if you're fighting full gore or augur, you know, of course, it's very effective against them. You know, fire pots might not be good. Fire pots aren't that great against someone like augur or gladius, where they have 50% fire resistance. So, lightning pots or magic pots might be a better choice for that kind of boss. You know, it's not all about fire pots. Fire pots are quick and convenient, but they don't solve everything. They do solve a lot, but not everything. All right, next pot. Holy pots. All right. So, you know, this would probably be good against Gladius and Healstore. I'll just call him Hollister. So, against Hollister and Gladius, let's test the Holy Pot. So, level 1. 100 damage. So far, the weakest of the other pots so far. Check out level 2. 180. Okay, level 2, that's actually pretty... Oh, wait, no, actually, no. The other pots were like 230, 240. Yeah, that's behind. A little disappointing so far. Alright. Level 3 now. Damage doesn't go up at all. Interesting. So, however, the Holy Pot has a little bit of a gimmick to it. When you throw it, it actually can heal you. So, that's the gimmick it has. So, it does not do a lot of damage, but it does heal you. So, unfortunately, they're probably not one of the best pots to use. Even if you're fighting Gladius or Healstore, as you saw here, this is probably what you're going to be hitting them with. You know, you're better off using fire pots, lightning pots, and magic pots against him. Which, again, you can use relics to start with, and also, they're kind of fairly common pots to pick up. So, holy pots, probably not one of the best. I mean, and maybe in very unique situations where you need to heal them and do damage, but I doubt you're going to run into a lot of situations like that. Yeah. The other thing, too, is, you know, you have to throw a certain amount of pots to level them up. And I'd say if you're trying to level up your fire pots to level 3 or magic, you know, you want to get the maximum amount of damage. If you find a bunch of holy pots, I would waste those pots at level 1 and 2 and use those to level up your stronger pots to 3. So if you have a bunch of fire pots, save the fire pots and only use them when you're at, like, level 3. Don't use them at level 1, because otherwise you're wasting, like, 8 pots right there. Alright. Okay. So these 4 right here, fire, magic, lightning, holy, you get relics that allow you to start with 4 pots each in each slot for a total of 12. You know, 3 separate regular relics. You can't get them in Deep of Night relics. Okay. We're going to test the other ones now. What will poison do? 1 damage. Now, yes, it is a status ailment, and it does take a few hits to proc it. That's true. Level 2. Okay. So the damage doesn't go up at all with a poison pot. I mean, the poison damage might go up if you can inflict it on the enemy. Unfortunately, I mean, maybe I'll try it in-game, and maybe I'll test it in the game, but, you know, just again, you know, just in general. Okay, level 3 now. Okay. Now it's starting to get a little interesting. It also has a gimmick. The damage does not increase from throwing the pot. I'm not positive about if it does a lot more if it does more poison damage, but it does have another interesting effect where it actually applies a debuff. You know, you kind of see that blue and black smoke around the targets. If I were to make an educated guess, I would say it's probably like 15%. I'm not actually completely sure. It reminds me of the Soul Stifler, which is about 15%. But it does. That's the gimmick right there. So Poison Pot, I would say, is not really not one of the highest damaging pots. I mean, again, it's only useful against enemies that you can use it. I mean, you can use it against a decent amount, but if you're fighting Black Kindred or Black Kindred's the only one that comes to mind. You know, they're not really that great. I mean, you can debuff them, but again, if you're trying to level your pots up, I would probably use these on the lower levels and level up your other pots like fire and stuff like this. I fought Gaping Jaw with poison pots, and they did okay, but they were maybe doing 800, and still with other pots I was hitting like 1,000 or more. So again, they're okay, but probably ones that are more worth wasting, I'd say. I mean, you can always be the judge, and it always depends, like, of course, on the situation and the enemies and bosses you're about to face. Alright. Oops, I didn't do anything. Alright. Fetid Pot. I think I'm saying that right. Oh well. Alright, level 1. This apparently applies, I think it's heavy poison, where it's like a faster acting poison, but I don't think it lasts as long. Let's go. Okay. 90 damage. So I'd say it's it's an extra 90 damage compared to a regular poison pot. Although I would have to go into the game and actually maybe test it, which again maybe I'll do at some point. Let's keep going though. All right. So you get the poison effect and also 90 plus damage on top of that. Now let's see what level 2 is. I'm gonna guess 120. Oh, never mind. It's the same. Yeah. You know, so I'd probably assume that you probably do more poison damage if the status works against that enemy. Again, there'll be probably further testing. Or, you know, maybe someone out there has actually tested it, like in the actual game. Alright. What does level 3 have? Okay. So you do more damage than a poison pot upon throwing it. And it still has the same debuff. So both poison and fetid apply a debuff at grade 3. Again, I'm not completely sure how much it is. Again, I'll maybe test it again at some point. I'd guess it's probably like 10 or 15, though. I bet they're probably about the same. The poison damage, I'm not sure if it goes up. But that's kind of the gist of it, though. And then the other downside to this pot is that it poisons yourself. You know, my health is gone, but since it's training mode, you're not going to die. So, oddly enough, I tend to find these pots in the camps with Death Blight. It's kind of a weird place to find them, I think. But they seem to be the most common in camps with, or ruins with Death Blight and, like, worm faces. Otherwise, I think that these are pots that you could probably throw away at level 1 and 2. Like, it doesn't mean just throw it away, but, like, you could just throw these at enemies. You know, it doesn't mean just, like, chuck it anywhere. Like, you can still aim at an enemy and chuck it just for the sake of leveling it up, so you don't have to completely waste it, is what I mean. So, you know, you want to use your pots still effectively. Alright. I think the last one in that category would be rot pots. Alright, what do we got? 4 damage. Oh, sorry. 31. Yeah. Off the top of my head, I'm not completely sure how much rot damage it does. I think it does out-damage poison, but again, I'm not 100%. At least in Elden Ring it did. And Night Rain, I'm not completely sure. Level 2. Alright. Damage goes up a little bit. Not a lot. So again, it's really going to be the status effect that does the work and not really throwing the pot itself. Alright, we got level 3 now. Alright, what do we got? Still the same, 31. Now, I've actually used this in the main game, and what it actually can do is it applies poison and rot. So at level 3, you can apply 2 status effects. Um, Rot pots are kind of rare, but if you get the rotted woods shifting earth, there's quite a bit there on that one. You know, maybe I'll come back with the poison and the fetid pot and test it on this enemy. Yeah, you know what? Let's go ahead and do it. I don't know why I didn't think of this one before. All right. So they're both level 3. Let's see which one does more. What are we gonna get to? Alright, that was about 310. Alright, try the fetid pot now. Okay. You know, it does more initial damage. Let's see if it outdamages the poison pot. $328. Oh wait, it's still going. Still going. So 328 plus 96. It's in the 400 range. So at least from that exchange, the fetid pot potentially seems like it is more damaging than a regular poison pot. But again, we'll test the rot pot finally. See which one's the king of poison, rot, status, all that. Get rotted. Oh, wait. Wait, hold on a second. We gotta reset that. Just resetting it. Okay. I want to see if I can get the poison and the rot off with one hit. Okay, there we go. I don't know why the last time I threw it, it only did rot. But look at that damage. It's pretty good. We're already at 300. I mean, this might potentially be double the amount poison and fetid do. Yeah, look at that. That's crazy. 623, 639. His health bar might reset. Yep, still going. So we got 639. 639 plus 104. So we're basically in the 700s with a rot pot. So it does about double the damage of both. You know, fetid, it's, yeah, about double. A little short with the fetid, but about double with the regular poison. So, you know, best poison rot pot is the rot pot. You know, that's how it was in Elden Ring. Night Rain seems to be the same deal. Okay. Swarm pots. Alright. Now, bleed is a very good status ailment against a lot of enemies. It doesn't work against every enemy, but it does work against a good portion of enemies. Now, with that said, is it all about just inflicting the status ailment, or does the pot itself also do any damage? We'll find out. Alright, so we're at level 1. $336 at level 1. That's about as much damage. That's almost as much damage as the lightning, the fire, and the magic pot does at grade 3. And this is grade 1. Also, again, you can do extra damage when the bleed, when you proc the bleed as well. Let's try that again. Yeah, 336. Swarm pot, bleed pot. Let's try level 2. Oh, okay. It's still the same. I mean, maybe the bleed... The bleed... Maybe it just makes... it just procs the bleed more, I would imagine. If I were to take an educated guess. Let's try something here. Okay, yeah, even up close doesn't make a difference. Alright. What does level 3 have? $528 at level 3. And that's not including proccing the bleed. So far, this is the strongest pot we have so far. And it's not like a pure power pot. You know, it inflicts a status ailment, which usually is weaker. And it's all due to the status ailment damage that does the extra damage. So bleed pots, or swarm pots, I like to call them bleed, are the strongest pots so far. You know, that is if you're only using Bagcraft and nothing else. And again, against regular enemies, if you could proc bleed, I don't think it works on a Marionette Soldier, but let's try it. Wow! 708 on him. I'm not actually sure. It doesn't. Maybe it procs it. Oh! That procced it. Alright. So, I guess the Rod Pot actually outdamages the Bleed Pot. You know, in a situation with a regular enemy. Again, other enemies, it might be different. But from just like a raw perspective, you know, just from the pot thrown and not inflicting the status ailment, it does the most damage. So this is just throwing the pot. Alright, test the other ones in a little bit. Okay. So we'll test the main 4 pots against the Marionette Soldier. Yeah. Kind of going a little bit out of order here, but, you know, we'll get back on track for a little bit. Fire pot. Yeah. So like I said before, it largely depends on if the fire is beneath him. You know, if the enemy runs away from the fire, you know, they run over here, they're not going to take that extra damage, though. So the initial hit is about 290. So, yes, they are very strong if all of the fire hits them. You know, potentially maybe being the strongest amongst the 4 pots I have right now. Magic pots now. 235 plus 96. So it's like about 320 range. Yeah, 320, 330 range. So I believe it does roughly about the same as it does on a training dummy. $362. Okay. So when we at least test it on at least this enemy, you know, each enemy could be a little different. Fire Pot seems to be the winner. Dealing about a total of 406. So if you're fighting an enemy that runs away a lot, a Magic Pot and a Lightning Pot might be a little bit more effective as it tracks them a lot better. You know, keep that in mind. Holy Water Pot now. Still doing 180. Yeah, nothing strong. So it's the weakest pot among these 4. Alright. We get back into testing the other pot damage now. So far. We tested fire, magic, lightning, holy, poison, fetid, rot, and swarm. Ice, freezing pot. Applying frost can be good. Alright, level 1. $101. Alright, so damage still seems about the same. Imagine the buildup of frost probably just applies quicker. You know, it's much like bleed. It applies like a burst amount of damage. Alright, level 3. Look at that. You get some icicles on the ground there. Whoa, whoa, wait up. Hold up. $356. So freeze pot at level 3 does about the same damage as some of the other pots do. You know, I think slightly higher. Yeah. So I guess much like the fire pot, you get some icicles that kind of go around. And I guess I imagine the buildup of frost would probably be a little quicker compared to level 1 and level 2. Not 100% on that, but possibly. Alright, let's test it on the marionette. I don't know if Frost works, but let's try it. It does. 496. Okay. That's a decent amount of damage. The other upside to a Frost Pot is that when you inflict frost on them, I think they take 15% more damage for like 30 seconds while the frost is procced on them. I think in Elden Ring it was 20%. I think in Night Rain here, I think it's 15. Might be 10. Not 100 on it. Alright. Sleep pots. They are pretty much notorious for just kind of putting things to sleep or kind of slowing them down. They're not really known as the best damaging pots. Definitely one of the lower ones. But again, you know, it's useful in unique situations like Godskin Duo or the Balancers. You know, as it puts them to sleep for a long time. You know, it kind of neutralizes them. Alright, anyways. What do a slap pot? What do sleep pots do? Let's see. 1 damage. Alright. We're at level 2 now. Still 1 damage. Yeah. It seems like the cloud of sleep gets larger, so I guess, again, it just applies the sleep effect faster as you upgrade it. We're on level 3 now. So this is like a holy pot in a way. Except it does way less damage, does virtually none. So when you throw it, it heals back your magic. Actually, do a little test. Use a little bit of Ash of War there, waste some magic. Ooh, so it does recover a decent amount of magic back. So, you could use it. I'd say that sleep pots are one of the most rare pots. I mean, there are sleep camps where you can loot them. But to level up all your other stronger pots, I would get rid of these first if you run into these. You know, in very unique situations, you know, you can use it to refill your magic. And also, you know, like I said, enemies like Godskin Duo and the Balancers you can put to sleep. And they can't attack you for like a good 30 seconds to a minute. And they're just kind of like asleep, so... You know, one of the lowest damaging pots so far. Alright. Volcano pots. In Elden Ring, volcano pots were really good. Are they the same in Night Rain? So these pots tend to be quite rare as well. I tend to notice they are in fire camps sometimes. They're in frenzy camps sometimes. I think there's forges and blacksmith villages that carry them sometimes too, but they still seem to be pretty rare. Alright. $240. So grade 1, out damaging the first 3 pots. You know, fire, magic, lightning. $336. So level 2 is about equal to level 2 of fire, magic, and lightning. Much like a fire pot at level 3, you know, they're going to have to stand within the pot at all times pretty much. If they run away, they won't take the full damage. Alright, level 3. Oh, that was 336. Oh wait, that's okay, yeah, here we go. 441. That's pretty good. A swarm pod is still kind of swarm pod I think still beats it by about like 60 damage, so I think that one's still kind of in the lead. Let's try it up close. So this one will be particularly good against larger foes, probably like a troll, Caligo maybe, something like that. You know, just a, you know, big wide enemy, because it's like a fire pot, but the fire and the magma, or whatever you might call it, spreads around a lot more. But it does do more damage than the first 3 regular pots do. So there is that. Alright. What do we got left? Ah, yes, Rancor Pots. I don't notice a lot of people using these. Actually, the next few pots are pretty rare. What do these got? You tend to find these pots at grave sites. They're grave sites that also have wraith bells. They drop Alluring pots, and they also drop Beastlure pots. And some item, I forget the name of the item, but it buffs your attack, I think, by like 15%. Looks like a chicken wing. I can't remember off the top of my head. But anyways, that's where you can find them. Grave sites. You know, wherever you find a wraith bell, you can also find these kinds of pots there too, usually. Alright, level 1. 108. That's not that good. I mean, it's okay. Whoa, okay, that jumps up quite a bit there. So we got 114 plus 176. So that's close to 300 on grade 2. You know, it's like 290-ish. Yeah, so it's about 300. 290, 300. Alright, grade 3. 114. Whoa. So it jumps up into the 400 range. That's pretty good. And around the map, there's actually quite a lot of grave sites. And they're not really drastically out of the way that much. You know, I'll have to make a video kind of showing them. Because this is probably one of the other pots that you could probably get more common. You know, grave sites, if you get to most of them, you probably could net yourself maybe like 4 to 8 of these Rancor pots. So, I believe they do magic damage as well. So it's interesting because I think they also outdamage actual magic pots. Yeah, so 114 plus 308. You know, gets you above 400. Alright. These two are some of the weakest pots. What will they do? Do they do anything? normally, these two pots are meant as a distraction. So if you use an Alluring Pot, if you throw that, it will attract human-type enemies towards the pot, and they'll attack the pot. It makes smoke come out of the pot, and the enemies will run towards the smoke, and they'll attack it for a few seconds. So it leaves them busy trying to attack it, kind of like Revan and their summons. You know, they'll turn their attention to the summon. You know, it takes the pressure off of you so that you can kind of hit the enemy from, like, behind. And then the Beastlure Pot is the same as an Alluring Pot. It's just that it attracts beastly prey. Like Beastmen. I think Misbegotten. I think it can attract them. You know, so they can be useful for kind of getting large groups of those beast enemies away from you and stuff like that. But anyways, what do we got here? Alluring Pot. Any good? Does it have some gimmick? Hidden gem? Or worthless? We'll find out. Alright. 1 damage. That's pretty bad. Not great. Yeah, so this smoke here will attract enemies, and they'll just be distracted, kind of like attacking it for a few seconds. So then you can just kind of sneak up behind them and just kind of hit them when they're distracted. Alright, level 2. 1 damage. If I were to take an educated guess, maybe it distracts the enemies more now. I mean, it's not really a status effect, technically, to attract enemies. You know, again, might have to test it, like in the actual game. Alright, level 3. Here's where things might get interesting. Or not. Might be a waste of time. Let's see what we got. Interesting. We got ourselves a stink bomb. And holy shit. We got ourselves a new high pot. 609. Out damaging the swarm pot, the bleed pot, by almost 100 damage. You know, I think we were hitting about like 533 with the swarm pot. And this has no status effects, for, you know, not that I know of, aside from attracting the attention of enemies. Let's try that again. Yeah, so the small smoke turns into like a smoke screen. I call it a stink bomb, a gas bomb. The way that it works, again, they have to be within this smoke. Again, if they kind of run out of the smoke, they're not going to take damage. One boss that this is particularly good on is the Demon from Below and the Demon in Pain, because they stay close together. And if you use Scholar's Communion Ultimate, it does even more damage. So, these are the strongest pots that do the most damage at level 3 if we're not doing any crazy buffs or anything. Although we do still have 1 pot left. Yeah. That's crazy how a 1 damage pot suddenly now does 6 times the damage. That was meant as merely a distraction, and not something lethal. Alright. Are they the same? Are they different? What do they got? What gimmick? Maybe it makes you run faster. I don't know. Anyways, level 1. 1 damage. So, you know, this smoke here will attract beasts. The beasts will kind of attack it. Again, you can sneak up behind them and attack them. Alright, we're at level 2. Maybe it'll do 2 damage. Double? Double or nothing? Alright, let's go. No. Oh. I think the smoke lasts a little bit longer, so I guess, it lasts longer to distract the enemies. Level 3. What do we got? Is it still going to be a piece of shit? Or will it be a hidden gem? Let's, well, whatever. Let's go. Well, well. Got ourselves a pink sync bomb now. 609 again. Ties. Alluring Pot. So Beastlure pots and Alluring pots do the highest amount of damage. Like, basically, without any crazy buffs or anything. You know, if you're just to upgrade your pots to level 3. Not counting status elements, either. So that's pretty crazy. I think a lot of people don't know about that. But yes, these pots are incredibly strong. And you can get them at the same place you get Rancor Pots and the Wraith Bell. You know, they have a chance to drop at the grave sites around the maps. So you can use them early to level up your pots, but if you have them at level 3 and you're fighting a large group of enemies, here's the other thing is it does a huge smoke screen that does 609, but it still attracts the enemies to that pot. So, you know, if you throw this and the beastmen are over here, they're going to come over and still try to attack it. So they basically walk right into the damage. And wow, did that just say... Oh, never mind. So it'll lure them into a stink bomb, a gas bomb. You know, a lot of other pots, you know, again, you know, if you run outside the radius, you won't take the damage. That's crazy. The most powerful pots are Beastlure pots and Alluring pots. Out-damaging swarm pots by almost 100 damage. You know, granted, again, you know, that's if the status effect doesn't, you know, the status effect doesn't come into play. Alright. Did we test ice on him? Well, whatever. Time to beat up the marionette soldier. Take a nap. Okay, 487. That's pretty good. Sleep pot, 1 damage. Yes, so that's the sleep effect right there. It'll kind of disorient the enemy for a little bit, or it'll actually put them to sleep for longer. It'll disorient them for like 30 seconds to a minute. Heals back the magic, but does trash damage. So again, I'd say this is one of those pots that you don't want to really hold on to in most scenarios. You know, only in a few select scenarios. Alright, Volcano. $526? That's pretty good. I think that's how much it was doing on the dummy. I think it was. Yeah, that's pretty good. Alright, Rancor Pots. Yeah, it's doing roughly about the same damage on the dummy over there. Yeah, we're kind of back up in the 400 range there. 308 plus 114. All right. And finally, we got Alluring Pots and Beastlure Pots. What do we got? Yeah, try it. Ow. $609. Staying exactly the same. So Beastlure Pots are still the winner. That is, again, if, you know, it's not crazy buffs and no status ailments. You know, I think the main thing I'm trying to get at is that early in the game, try to pick up these pots because they are some of the strongest pots you can use, especially early game, before you have anything upgraded. I mean, they do nothing at level 1 and 2, unfortunately. Yeah, that's disappointing. But they have the highest damage, not including any status of elements building up, though. You know, so they are potentially one of the weakest to one of the strongest. Yeah. So, even though we can only buy 50 fire pots now, you know, it doesn't mean that pot runs are dead. I think you still can run pot builds, but some of the pots you definitely want to keep your eyes out for. Definitely loot the grave sites in Limgrave. It's Limveld. I don't know why. Limgrave, that's from Elden Ring. Limveld. There's quite a bit of grave sites that will carry Rancor Pots, Alluring Pots, and Beastlure Pots. You'll probably be able to pick up between like 4 to 8 of these. Most matches. And most of the grave sites aren't generally out of the way. They're not too far out of the way. They're a little bit, but not specifically. You know, I'll show the locations of where you can go to find some of these pots. But, yeah. You know, don't only use just fire pots if you're doing a pot-only run. Fire pots should be the most common pot you use because it's the easiest to get, but you should still have other pots on hand. You know, again, if you're fighting someone like Gladius or Augur, you know, you might want to try to go for lightning pots. So you go to, you know, forts and camps that are lightning based. Magic pots can be a decent substitute as well for fire pots, although fire pots I think are still slightly stronger in most cases. Holy pots, I kind of skip. I think they're throwaway. Poison. Fetid is better. Rot pots, very good if you can get the status to apply. Otherwise, the damage is just kind of, I think it was like around 100, 91, something like that. Swarm pots. If we're talking if status effects actually were in play, I think this pot would probably win. I think it depends. It might depend on the enemy. But, I mean, you're already doing, I think it was 533 at level 3, and this was without the bleed even applying. So, yeah, even if you're fighting an enemy that doesn't bleed, like a Valiant Gargoyle, you can still hit them for 533, which still outdamages a fire, a magic lightning, you know, most of the pots. Freezing pot. It's also pretty okay. I think that the main thing here is that it applies that debuff if you get the freeze off, and they take more damage for about 20 or 30 seconds. So that's kind of the main thing there. Sleep pots, I think, are another throwaway. Again, they're useful in very unique situations, but they do 1 damage basically, so probably one of the worst. Volcano pots, still pretty good. They've got to be one of the rarest pots to find, I'd say, but they are pretty good. They I don't think they I think they not quite as much as Swarm, but I think they still do outdamage a lot of the other pots though, from what I remember. Rancor pots, also pretty good. They do more damage than a regular magic pot. And these can be quite common. It still is a little bit of a pain in the ass to try to farm for them, but like I said, if you get in the habit of trying to loot some of the grave sites around the maps, the grave sites are not drastically out of the way. Sometimes when you're going to if you go to the grave sites, there's usually other areas that are close by that you can do to, you know, level yourself up and get other items. So they kind of fall together. You know, sometimes you'll start in a location that has a bunch of grave sites all around you, so you can just kind of like get it done right there at the beginning. And then the same thing with Alluring Pots and Beastlure. You know, again, at grave sites, you can loot them there. You know, it's always going to be different pot. It's not going to always be the same. It could be a Rancor, Alluring, or Beastlure. It might throw you 2 of these. It might throw you a Rancor and Alluring. So, they're worth looting. You know, if you're fighting someone that's weak against fire, like Caligo or Sentient Pest, I'd say try to hold on to your fire pots until you fight that final boss. And I would try to, you know, if you want to keep using pots the entire run, go to those grave sites and use these pots. Use those for the run, for day 1, day 2, and try not to use these until day 3 when you fight the Night Lord. I think that's about it. So yeah, the patch, while I do think it does kind of suck that you can't buy unlimited fire pots, you know, I don't think that means that pot builds are rendered useless. I still think they are possible. You still can make pots really, really strong in Deep of Night in particular, because you get 3 extra relic slots, which you can put 3 improved pot damage +1, which is about 35% more damage just for one of those. So, you know, again, it's going to be more about the quality of your pot and not the quantity. You know, other little tidbits too. Save your fire, you know, try to save your pots for big groups of enemies, very strong enemies like Crucible Knights or Banished Knights. If you're fighting an enemy that has fire resistance, don't use it on them, obviously. You know, Smelter Demon, Great Worm, Demon of Hatred, Moog, Lord of Blood. They're pretty much useless. They all have like 50 to 80% resistance. You know, that's, you know, in a scenario like that, carry like 16 fire pots and then maybe carry like 4 Alluring and 4 Rancor, and, you know, just so you have those other types of pots to be able to use on those enemies, just in case you end up with an enemy that has high fire resistance. You know, you're going to run into a village sometimes. You might end up finding like 8 or 12 swarm pots, and you got to kind of decide. You know, I can only hold a certain amount of pots. I have 20 fire pots, but I know the boss that I'm going to fight doesn't have the best bleed resistance. You know, bleed is pretty strong. You know, you're going to have to make decisions whether you're going to drop the pots forever and replace them with stronger pots. So, again, you don't need just only fire pots to make a pot build viable. You know, take advantage of these other pots, get used to where they are. Eventually, you'll kind of learn the areas where it is really drastically out of the way. But most often, a lot of the places that you go by yourself or even with your teammates, the places where you can find pots nearby in crates and then grave sites are usually close, and usually those other camps, they might have bleed weapons if you're going to get swarm pots. You know, they might have magic pots if you go to a castle, if they're going to get a magic weapon, and again, might have lightning pots if you go to a lightning camp, you know, for full gore. And then Rancor pots also pop up in lightning ruins. So they're actually quite common in lightning ruins, which is a weird one for me. I've noticed this, though. I think some of the lightning ruins I've done, I get like 2 lightning pots, but I get like 6 Rancor pots. It's so bizarre. You find more lightning pots in an actual camp, but not a ruins. So yeah, Rancor pots might be like the second most common pot that you'll run into. Probably along with lightning pots. So keep your eyes out for these. They're both 2 good pots. You know, you could probably use these more towards the beginning and save the fire pots for later, or vice versa. You know, you grab some of these, you hold on to these, and just use fire pots the entire run. And then also these hidden gems too. You know, you can use these to defeat very large groups of enemies. Like in the castle in the middle, if you have the lion and a bunch of banished knights all together, if you can get them to get all close to each other, you throw it between all of them, and they all take 609 damage. You use Communion Ultimate on top of that, they take even more, because it links their damage all together. So, yeah. You know, don't just waste a pot throwing it at one little weak enemy. You know, try to make sure you hit a bunch of enemies at once. You save it for bigger enemies. Very good against enemies like Tree Sentinel, Draconic, because it can actually kind of stun them. So yeah, you need to be wise. Remember, focus on the quality and not the quantity. You know, pot runs aren't dead. Pot runs are still doable. The other thing too, I know I keep kind of going on. Get other items along the runs too. They're not always as great as the fire pots, but knives, crystal knives, well, crystal darts, throwing daggers, Kakuris, they inflict bleed. You know, they're not as good as a swarm pot, but they still can inflict bleed, which is good. Fan daggers are really good too. Granted, you have to hit the enemy with all of them, so they're better against bigger enemies, not the greatest against small. But you can carry 12 of them, and I think in one of my knife-only runs, I think I was hitting Full Gore and Libra for like 240 per hit. Where like a regular knife, I think, was hitting them for like 109 or something like that. So they do a decent amount of damage, and you can throw them fast. Glintstones. They got buffed, I believe, with this patch. So they do a lot of damage now. Before, they weren't. But yesterday, I actually beat Gladius rather easily with a combination of Glintstone Scraps and Cuckoo Glintstones. Now, these are a little bit harder to find. But in a nutshell, you find these in mines. So if you wanted to get a level 2 smithing stone, there's usually some glintstone scraps and cuckoo glintstones, large glintstones that are kind of around, you know, so while you're doing a level 2 smithing stone run, you could probably find these in those caves along the way. In the Forsaken Hollows, the 2 mines that you have there have a ton of these. I think one run, there's been a few runs where I got like 12 Kuko Glintstones, and they're like one of the highest damaging Glintstones you can use, at least before the patch. Like, I was hitting some enemies for like 1,300, where before Glintstone Scraps and Large Stone were hitting them for like 300 to 500. I mean, now it's like I think glintstone scraps are doing like 600, 800 now, and these are like the large ones are like 700, 800. Gravity stone fans, also really good. You find these with the miners. The miners are outside the large castle. There's a group of miners in the upper left spot of the map, and there's a group of miners that are kind of slightly below that area. There's a total of 15 miners, I believe. They drop gravity stone fans, and they drop chunks. Fans are really good, especially if you get them to 3. Chunks are still okay, but fans obviously do more damage, and they spread out, and they spread further. So, if you run into miners, if you're going to the castle to level up, kill those miners outside, and just grab their stones. I mean, the miners themselves also give a good amount of runes as well. So it's not like it's a complete waste of time killing miners along the way. They're probably some of the easier enemies, compared to like a Crucible Knight or a Banished Knight. And, you potentially pick up, some of these good things right here. So, pick up these items if you happen to be nearby, along with your pots. Just so that, again, you always have something else on hand. Alright. Have fun with your pot builds. Hopefully this video helped. At least as far as damage and kind of builds and stuff like that. Take care! Bye.